And we return to coverage of this historic day in the United States with Biden, the president-elect, after winning Pennsylvania. Joining me now, the Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and former Deputy Secretary in Defence, Peter Jennings. Peter, good to see you tonight in Canberra.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi. Trump is clinging on to the presidency summer, urging him to make a graceful concession speech and enable a transition, while still feeling free to pursue any legal issues in the courts so that he doesn't damage his legacy. So, look, I just want to look for a moment at his legacy. What do you consider the most important things that Trump has done when in office?
Oh, gosh, well, I think probably they are more domestic than in terms of international policy, Shari. I mean, he presided over significant growth in the American economy until COVID hit. He engaged in a range of tax reforms, which were very beneficial to the business community and therefore supported growing employment in the United States. I think domestically, however, his legacy is definitely going to be tarnished by his failure to appreciate the seriousness of COVID and to gear the American system around to responding to it. And in fact, that failure has been so comprehensive, Shari, America is now going for a herd immunity strategy because they're unable to do anything else. As you said earlier, when 130,000 people in a day today have been infected, you know that COVID is going to run right through the American system. In terms of foreign policy, again, a mixed record. Trump was hard on the NATO allies in particular, but for a good reason, which was that they were failing to spend the sort of money that was necessary for their own defence. And I think he pushed a number of NATO countries to do more. In the Asia-Pacific region, I value what Trump did in terms of puzzling China, giving China pause. To be concerned about how the United States was reacting, for example, to their building of those island air bases in the South China Sea, their wholesale cyber espionage in the United States and indeed in Australia. So he gave China pause for thought in a way that Barack Obama in his first term failed to do so. Then, of course, on the Korean Peninsula, there was the ultimately failed attempt to try to negotiate a nuclear deal with Kim Jong-un, something that no previous American president had tried. But Trump, unfortunately, walked away from that unsuccessful. So overall, it's a mixed record. And I guess finally one would have to say he's also been responsible for, in many ways, bringing a new type of brutalism to how the American president approaches the international community and his own people. I think it's going to take a long time for that to settle, both domestically in the United States and indeed around the world.
Yeah. Look, let's turn to a Biden presidency. A lot about what a Biden presidency will look like will depend on his cabinet makeup. We just had the former Ambassador Jeffrey Bleish on. He wouldn't speculate other than, to say that some of the more hardline progressives wouldn't be included in it, or at least not Elizabeth Warren. There has been speculation on sites like Politico and the New York Post that his cabinet could include Susan Rice, Chris Coons, former eBay boss Meg Whitman. Another name is someone that you have actually worked with, Peter, when you were Deputy Secretary. Your counterpart in the Pentagon was Michelle Flournoy. She's been touted as Biden's defense secretary. Is she someone who you think would be a good appointment in cabinet? And do you think Biden should stay away from the more progressive and divisive figures?
Yes, I think Biden should certainly stay away from the sort of progressive left of the Democrat Party. That is not going to position himself as the president for all of the United States. And I think he'll be mindful of that. And at heart, he's a moderate as well. Michelle Flournoy, as you say, I know quite well. She was my counterpart in the Pentagon when I was the Deputy Secretary in our Defence Department. And I negotiated with her the rotational deployment of the American Marine Corps into Darwin, which is now in its 8th year and working very successfully. I think she would be a very strong Secretary of Defence. And if she is put into that job, she's someone that knows Australia incredibly well. And as a person who thinks in terms of America's alliance interests rather than America acting alone in the world, and that would be a welcome change. There's another person too that I think is often mentioned as potentially a Secretary of State or a National Security Advisor, and that's Kurt Campbell. Kurt Campbell again served as a senior State Department official during the Obama time as a Asia Pacific specialist, and again someone who knows Australia very well. So, you know, these people really reflected the best of the Democrat team in the foreign affairs and defence space during the first term of the Obama administration. I think things got a bit weaker for Obama when they left, quite frankly. And if they're back in senior cabinet secretary roles, I think Australia can feel very confident that the alliance relationship is going to be respected and looked after. And Shari, also worth saying, Biden, I think, will have more expectations of allies. So we shouldn't imagine this as a return to an easy run. Any American president from here on is going to want allies to do more in terms of defence spending, in terms of being active in their region, to promote their security and the security of like-minded countries. Biden will want that from Australia. And frankly, Australia should be prepared to step forward and do it because it's very much in our interests.
Well, Australia would probably have an ask of the US to spend more in the Pacific, which I think has been a continuing ask every time a PM or foreign minister goes over there. Look, but just before you go, Peter, I want to ask you about something the very discredited former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd said on the ABC this morning. He said that Australia had failed to take up multiple olive branches extended by Beijing, and that this was, you know, the reason for the state of the tense relationship between Australia and China at the moment. Do you think his assessment has any, you know, accuracy or credit at all?
None whatsoever, Shari. I must say I watch this area as close as anyone, and I don't see olive branches. What I've seen is a handful of statements from Chinese diplomats repeating some pretty tired talking points, at the same time as China is comprehensively engaged in trying to coerce Australia economically and is engaged in full-on cyber espionage of Australia. Let's be clear about this, Shari. This is not a failure of Australian diplomacy. What's happening right now is an assertive China under Xi Jinping, which is determined to push forward its interests at the expense of everyone else's. And, you know, nice talking points, phone calls from Australian ministers to Chinese ministers, if and when they ever happen, that's not going to fix that situation. It's a strategic fight, and we should have the, you know, intellectual courage to recognise that's what it is and be prepared to actually make that explanation in Washington, D.C. when Biden becomes president, so that we can get the Americans thinking and acting about China in ways that suit our interests.
Yeah, I think, Peter, that if someone thinks hacking, espionage, intellectual property theft and trade tariffs amounts to an olive branch, then they have probably lost their mind. Peter Jennings,
yes,
thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you very much for your time.